Sophia slammed the door again, the sound echoing through the mansion as Gabriel watched, powerless. Every maid and nanny he brought in was rejected, cold glares, no words. His daughter was lost in grief, and he couldn't reach her. But one evening, he walked into the living room and stopped in his tracks. There was Sophia, smiling, sitting on the couch beside the new maid, Amara, who was softly strumming her guitar. The warmth in Sophia's eyes was something Gabriel hadn't seen in months. But just as Gabriel's heart swells with hope, Amara's song reveals a secret from her past, one that could change everything. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. The Russo mansion loomed tall and imposing against the gray sky, its towering presence a stark contrast to the emptiness within. Inside the cold, opulent halls felt even more isolating. Gabriel Russo, a billionaire with enough wealth and power to change the world, sat in his expansive office, staring out the window. His fingers gripped the edge of his polished desk, trying to anchor himself to a reality that no longer made sense. For weeks, Gabriel had watched his daughter, Sophia, slip further away. The vibrant little girl who had once filled their home with laughter was now a shadow of herself. Since her mother's tragic death, Sophia had grown distant, withdrawn, and completely silent. Her world had crumbled in an instant, and nothing could bring her back to the child she once was. Despite his vast resources, Gabriel was helpless. No matter how many experts or nannies he brought into their lives, none could reach his daughter. None could undo the damage the loss of her mother had caused. Gabriel had hired the best child therapists money could buy, flown them in from all over the country, yet nothing worked. Each session ended the same way. Sophia still sat there, unresponsive. She would no longer cry, but her eyes held a deep sorrow, a quiet pain that cut through her like a blade. The grief had lodged itself deep inside her, and she seemed to have sealed herself off from the world, unwilling to let anyone in. Not even her father. Gabriel tried everything. He hired nannies, caretakers, women who had experience in dealing with grief-stricken children. He threw money at the problem, giving them everything they needed, from luxurious living arrangements to the best childcare tools. Yet, nothing worked. Sophia rejected them all. She refused to speak to them, let alone smile or show any signs of comfort. The only thing she would hold close was a worn-out stuffed rabbit her mother had bought for her. It was the only source of solace left in her world. Each evening, after long exhausting days at work, Gabriel would come home to an eerily quiet house. The grand dining room, once filled with lively chatter and laughter, was now deserted. He would sit alone at the long marble table, staring at the empty chair across from him. His mind would drift to Isabel, his wife, and the hole her absence had left in his life. But it was more than just the emptiness left by her death. It was the coldness that now separated him from Sophia. He had been a successful businessman, used to controlling every aspect of his life. But when it came to his daughter, he felt completely powerless. His wealth couldn't fix this. His influence couldn't change it. The mansion, with its grand furniture and sparkling chandeliers, felt more like a prison than a home. Gabriel had everything he could ever want, but he couldn't give his daughter what she needed, the love and comfort she had lost. The silence was unbearable. Gabriel spent nights pacing the halls of the mansion, his mind racing with worry and doubt. He passed by Sophia's room, her door slightly ajar, and would catch a glimpse of her small figure curled up in bed, her stuffed rabbit held tightly in her arms. He would stand there for a moment, looking at her, feeling the weight of her sadness. He could see that she was lost in her grief, trapped in a place he couldn't reach. His attempts to comfort her were met with failure. He would sit beside her, wrap his arms around her, whisper words of love, but they fell on deaf ears. She didn't respond. Not with a smile. Not with a tear. Not with any sign of recognition. And in those moments, Gabriel felt like a stranger to his own daughter. As the days turned to weeks, Gabriel's frustration grew. He threw himself into his work, hoping that the distraction would help him forget the pain he felt every time he looked at Sophia. He was surrounded by business meetings, contracts, and decisions that affected the fate of his empire. Yet, nothing he did in the boardroom could erase the growing chasm between him and his daughter. The only thing that mattered to him now was fixing their broken family, but the more he tried, the more distant she seemed. The mansion had become a silent tomb, echoing with the absence of the laughter and joy that had once filled its walls. Gabriel, despite all his wealth and success, felt like the loneliest man in the world. His daughter, his pride and joy, was slipping away from him, and he didn't know how to stop it. Sophia didn't even look at him anymore. There were no more hugs, no more shared moments. Gabriel had always been her hero. But now, it was as if he had become a stranger. He didn't know how to fix it. He didn't know how to bring her back. In the quiet of his office, Gabriel realized the truth. He had no control over this. His wealth, his power, could not fix the hurt that had overtaken his daughter's heart. All he could do was watch, helpless, as she slowly withdrew further into herself. The mansion, grand and beautiful, had become a symbol of everything Gabriel had lost. It was filled with priceless art, fine furniture, and every luxury money could buy, but it was hollow. Without his daughter's laughter, without her smile, it felt like nothing more than an empty shell. As Gabriel sat there, alone in his office, the weight of it all pressed down on him. His daughter, the one thing in his life he had loved more than anything else, was slipping through his fingers. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. Amara stepped quietly into the Grand Russo mansion, the weight of the silence inside palpable as the heavy oak door closed behind her. She had been hired as one of the many nannies and caretakers who had come and gone in the past few weeks, but something about her presence was different. She wasn't a woman who demanded attention or sought to win anyone over with empty words or grand gestures. Amara moved through the rooms with the grace of someone who understood the quiet nature of grief. She wasn't here to fix anyone or change anything. She was here simply to be. Her first few days in the mansion were spent cleaning and arranging things with precision, her soft movements almost imperceptible against the backdrop of the stillness. She didn't try to engage with Sophia, nor did she force any interaction. Where the other maids had tried to bring toys, sweets, or bright smiles to coax the little girl into speaking, Amara only smiled gently when their eyes met, but she said nothing. Instead, she would quietly go about her work, the soft clink of dishes and the hum of a vacuum cleaner filling the silence that had once been lively with Sophia's laughter. Amara had seen grief before. She had grown up in foster care, moved from home to home, never staying long enough to put down roots. She understood the silent walls people built when they had been hurt, when their world had shattered. She had been the quiet observer in so many households before, and she knew better than most that sometimes the best thing you could do for someone who was grieving was to simply be present. It was the one thing that had always comforted her in the worst of times, the quiet understanding that you didn't need to speak to let someone know they weren't alone. Sophia, as expected, didn't make a move toward Amara. The little girl, now 3 years old, had withdrawn completely into herself after the loss of her mother. Her eyes, once bright and full of life, now seemed to look through everything, never meeting anyone's gaze. Gabriel had tried everything: kind words, soft toys, new clothes, but nothing could break through the wall of silence that surrounded his daughter. And yet, there was something in the way Amara moved about the house that seemed to ease the heavy air, as though her mere presence was enough to fill the empty spaces. Amara would catch glimpses of Sophia, sitting on the grand staircase, clutching her beloved stuffed rabbit to her chest. She wouldn't speak, wouldn't smile, but her eyes would follow Amara's every movement as she dusted the banister or swept the floors. It wasn't much, but it was something. Amara didn't force it, didn't try to coax Sophia into a conversation she wasn't ready for. She simply worked, her quiet presence a constant reassurance to the girl, a sign that someone was here, waiting patiently for her to heal in her own time. The days stretched into weeks, and Amara's subtle approach began to work its magic. One morning, as Amara was polishing the antique clock in the living room, she noticed Sophia standing just inside the doorway, watching her with wide eyes. Amara didn't acknowledge her directly, didn't speak, but she let her fingers glide over the polished wood with a soft hum. She was careful not to make any sudden movements, but just as she reached for the rag again, she heard a soft voice from behind her. "Can I help?" Sophia's words were quiet, almost a whisper, but they hung in the air between them like a fragile bridge being built. Amara turned slowly, her heart swelling in her chest. She nodded with a soft smile. "Of course, sweetheart," she said gently. "You can help me dust the table if you like." For a moment, there was only silence, the kind of silence that comes before something new and tender is born. Then, Sophia took a few hesitant steps toward her, dragging the stuffed rabbit along the floor behind her. She stood beside Amara, looking up at the dusting cloth in her hands, and without a word, reached out to take it. Amara handed her the rag, careful to keep her movements slow and unhurried. Together, they began to wipe down the surface of the table. Amara didn't rush, didn't force conversation. She simply let the quiet companionship of the moment speak for itself. Over time, Amara's presence in the house became a quiet but steady comfort. Sophia didn't speak much, but her small actions began to change. She would sit near Amara as she worked, not always engaging, but always present. Sometimes she would watch Amara with curious eyes, and other times she would sit beside her, just for the company. The house, which had been filled with an unbearable silence, began to hum with a subtle, quiet energy. Gabriel noticed it too. He saw how his daughter, who had once recoiled from every attempt at kindness, now seemed to find some small measure of peace in the presence of Amara. He didn't understand it at first, but he felt it. There was something different in the air when Amara was near, something soft, something healing. It wasn't grand or dramatic, but it was enough. Sophia's grief hadn't disappeared. It would never disappear. But with Amara's quiet understanding, she had started to let the walls come down just a little. And that, Gabriel realized, was the first step. Amara never pushed Sophia, never rushed her. She simply allowed the girl to find her own way through her grief, showing her that it was okay to take time, to be silent, to heal in her own space. It was in the stillness of these moments that the first glimmer of hope began to form, hope that perhaps one day, Sophia would smile again. And when she did, Amara would be there, waiting quietly, with her heart full of patience and understanding. The mansion was quiet, as it always was in the evenings. The stillness seemed to wrap itself around every corner, every room, heavy with the weight of unsaid words and unhealed wounds. Gabriel was in his study, as he often was after a long day of meetings, and Sophia, as usual, was nowhere to be found, hidden away in her silent world. The emptiness that had gripped their home since Isabel's passing lingered like a shadow, unnoticed but ever present. Amara, the maid, was going about her usual tasks in the grand living room. The dusting, the sweeping, the little chores that filled the hours. It was a monotonous routine, one she had grown accustomed to. But tonight, something felt different. The quiet in the house seemed to press closer, heavier, until she felt an inexplicable urge to break the silence. She glanced toward the corner of the room, where her old guitar rested against the wall, gathering dust like so many other forgotten things. Her fingers brushed against the strings as she lifted the guitar, the soft sound breaking through the quiet like a breath after a long wait. Amara had always found comfort in music, something that helped her escape the noise of the world, the weight of her own past. She strummed the strings lightly, lost in the rhythm, humming softly to herself. The song she began to play wasn't planned. It just flowed out of her naturally, a song she had written long ago, back when she had been younger, when her heart still carried the pain of losing someone she loved. "I miss my mother," Amara whispered the words under her breath as she played, the melody simple yet haunting. The song had always been a part of her, a reflection of the sorrow she had carried quietly in her chest. She didn't expect anyone to hear her, didn't think anyone would even be listening. But someone was listening. Sophia, sitting in the living room just out of sight, heard the soft strumming of the guitar and the melody that seemed to resonate with an emotion she couldn't put into words. She had been sitting in the corner, clutching her mother's old photograph to her chest, her eyes distant, her face as closed off as it had been for weeks. But the music cut through the silence that had encased her, like a crack in a wall she didn't know was there. Slowly, as though drawn by an invisible force, Sophia stood up. Her small feet padded silently across the room toward the sound, her face still set in that sorrowful mask, but her eyes wide listening. The melody seemed to speak to her in a way no one had in a long time. She wasn't sure why, but something in the song made her feel less alone, less invisible. Amara continued to play, her voice barely audible, but steady as she sang the words she had carried in her heart for years. "I miss my mother, the warmth of her embrace, the way she'd smile and tell me everything would be okay." Sophia's face, which had been frozen in grief, began to soften. For the first time in what felt like forever, her small features relaxed, the tightness around her eyes easing just a little. The song resonated with a truth she had buried so deep that even she hadn't realized it was still there. Amara's voice, soft and soothing, seemed to speak directly to her sorrow, to the pain she had been carrying in silence. The words felt like they had been written for her, for the little girl who had lost her mother and didn't know how to ask for help. Amara's song filled the room, a thread of connection that began to weave its way between her and Sophia. The grief that had hardened the little girl's heart slowly began to thaw, the jagged edges softened by the warmth of the music. She didn't know why or how, but for the first time in weeks, Sophia felt seen. The pain she had kept locked away was no longer hers to carry alone. The song had reached her in a way nothing else had. As the final chords of the song lingered in the air, Sophia's lips parted, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. The song had not just touched her heart, it had opened it. And as the last note faded, something shifted in Sophia. A small, tentative smile tugged at the corners of her lips. It was barely there, fragile as a butterfly's wing, but it was enough. Amara paused, her fingers still on the strings, but she didn't move. She didn't look at Sophia yet. She simply let the silence stretch for a moment, letting the connection settle. Sophia, after what felt like an eternity, finally looked up at Amara, her eyes full of something new, hope. She didn't say anything, didn't need to. The smile on her face, though small, said everything. Amara's song had done what nothing else could. It had healed a part of Sophia that was still broken, still mourning, and for the first time in a long while, the little girl felt something other than sorrow. Amara put the guitar down gently, her heart swelling with a quiet pride. She hadn't forced it, hadn't pushed. All she had done was share her music, her truth, and in return, Sophia had found her way back to herself, just a little bit. For the first time since Isabel's death, Gabriel saw the faintest glimpse of the daughter he had lost. And in that moment, the music had done more than heal, it had given him hope. The days in the Russo mansion seemed to blur together in an endless cycle of quiet moments. The silence was still ever present, but there were subtle changes now, things Gabriel couldn't ignore. He'd begun to notice small, almost imperceptible shifts in his daughter Sophia. She didn't speak, not yet, but there were moments, a fleeting glance, a hesitant movement, that hinted at a spark he hadn't seen since before Isabel's death. The one constant in Sophia's world had become Amara. The black maid, the quiet woman who never pushed, never forced, had become a figure of comfort in the house. Amara's guitar, which had initially been a source of solace for her own soul, had somehow reached Sophia in a way nothing else could. Each evening, Amara would sit in the living room after finishing her chores and strum the strings softly, humming to herself. At first, Sophia had only watched from a distance, her face expressionless, her small form curled up with her stuffed rabbit. But the music, it seemed, had begun to stir something in her. The mansion, grand and silent as it was, started to feel less like a house and more like a home for the first time in months. The walls that had kept Sophia locked in her grief slowly began to show cracks, and the quiet, gentle presence of Amara played a large part in that. There was no rush to push Sophia into healing. There were no demands, no pressures. Amara simply allowed her to be, offering her music and a steady, patient companionship. She played songs, tender melodies like the one she had sung that day, "I Miss My Mother," songs that conveyed emotions too complex for words. The music was both an invitation and a balm, offering Sophia a way to express what she couldn't yet say aloud. Amara had learned to read the subtle language of grief. The small glances Sophia gave her, the way her hand would brush against the edge of the chair when Amara was close, these were signs, small threads of connection. And over time, they built a quiet bridge between them. Amara never tried to force it. She knew that Sophia's healing would come in its own time. But each day that passed, she could sense the walls around Sophia's heart beginning to weaken. One late afternoon, the mansion's usual quiet was broken only by the gentle strumming of Amara's guitar. Gabriel, who had been caught up in work again, found himself standing at the edge of the grand staircase, watching from a distance. He had just returned from a business meeting, his mind full of numbers and deadlines, but something about the music, something about the soft rhythm that filled the air, pulled him toward the living room. He leaned against the banister, watching as Amara played, her fingers moving gracefully over the strings. Sophia was there, sitting just a few feet away, her legs tucked beneath her. She was unusually still, more so than usual, and Gabriel's gaze softened as he observed his daughter. For the first time in weeks, Sophia wasn't lost in her own world of grief. Her eyes, though still filled with the deep sorrow of loss, were focused on Amara. She didn't look at her father, but Gabriel could see the subtle shift in her body language. The rigidity that had defined her movements for so long had softened. It was as though the music was giving her permission to feel something, to allow herself to be present, even if just for a moment. Amara's voice, soft and steady, filled the room as she sang another song. Her words, like the music, were simple but full of depth. She wasn't singing to entertain. She wasn't singing for an audience. She was singing to Sophia, offering her something that no one else had been able to, an emotional bridge built not on words, but on shared understanding and quiet empathy. Gabriel watched as his daughter's hand twitched. He thought it was just a nervous reaction at first, but then something remarkable happened. Sophia, as though she were reaching out from the depths of her grief, slowly extended her small hand toward Amara. Gabriel's breath caught in his chest as he watched Sophia's fingers brush against Amara's arm, the first time she had ever touched anyone since her mother's passing. It was such a simple gesture, so small and quiet, but for Gabriel, it felt like the entire world had shifted. He had tried everything, therapy, toys, distractions, but none of it had worked. Sophia had remained distant, unreachable. But here, in this quiet moment, he witnessed something powerful. His daughter had found her way back to connection, and it hadn't been through force or through words. It had been through the patience and understanding of the woman who played her guitar every evening. The room seemed to hold its breath as Sophia pulled her hand back, her gaze never leaving Amara. There was no dramatic revelation, no immediate flood of emotion. But in that simple touch, something had changed. Sophia had reached out. She had allowed herself to trust, just a little. And Gabriel, watching from the shadows, felt a swelling in his chest, a mixture of relief and hope, both of which had felt foreign to him in recent weeks. Amara didn't stop playing, didn't acknowledge the moment. She simply let the music continue, her fingers moving gently over the guitar's strings. She wasn't looking for recognition, nor was she trying to make anything happen. She was just present, just offering a small piece of comfort in the form of a song. That was all. Gabriel stood there, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. He couldn't believe it. His daughter, who had been so closed off, had just taken a step toward healing. It was small, so small that most people wouldn't have noticed it. But for Gabriel, it was everything. He didn't have to force anything. He didn't have to push Sophia to speak or to express herself. He had only to let her be, to trust that the connection she needed would come when she was ready. As Amara finished the song and set her guitar aside, Gabriel finally moved from his position at the stairs. He stepped into the living room, his eyes lingering on Sophia for a moment. She hadn't turned to him. She hadn't said anything. But the smile on her face, though faint, told him everything he needed to know. For the first time in weeks, he saw a flicker of the girl he had lost, the daughter he had feared might be gone forever. The room was still, but it wasn't as heavy as it had been. There was a quiet peace between them now, a peace that was born not from words, but from the unspoken bond that had formed between Amara and Sophia. It was a glimmer of hope, fragile but real, and for the first time in a long while, Gabriel allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things would get better. What would you have done if you were in Gabriel's shoes? Would you have tried something different, or did Amara's patience and music seem like the right approach? Let us know in the comments below. The weeks had passed quietly in the Russo mansion, each day a small step forward, though no one noticed the true magnitude of the change until it had already taken root. At first, it was just the smallest of shifts. Sophia, who had been a ghost in her own life, now made the effort to acknowledge Amara. A glance. A smile. A hand resting on Amara's arm as if to say, "You're here with me." The days blurred together, but slowly, imperceptibly, a bond was forming. Gabriel had started to notice it, though he tried not to hope for anything too soon. His daughter, who had once been a silent, unreachable presence in the house, had begun to smile again. The smiles were small, fleeting, but real. They were the kind that filled the empty spaces in Gabriel's heart, though he wasn't yet ready to admit just how much he had been longing to see them. There was something different now. He could feel it in the way the air seemed to shift when he walked into a room, in the way Sophia's eyes would light up when Amara was around. It was subtle at first, just the soft hum of change. The music, the guitar Amara played every evening, seemed to linger in the house, infusing the air with a sense of warmth and possibility. Sophia had become more animated, responding to Amara's gentle coaxing, playing with her, talking with her in soft tones. It wasn't forced. It wasn't rushed. It was simply a quiet connection, one that had been earned through patience and presence. One evening, after another dinner where laughter filled the dining room, a sound that had been nearly impossible to imagine just weeks before, Gabriel found himself watching his daughter with a mixture of awe and relief. She was sitting across the table from him, laughing at something Amara had said, her small hand reaching out to touch Amara's arm as if there were no walls between them anymore. It was such a simple thing, but to Gabriel, it felt like the world had shifted. It had been so long since he had heard that kind of joy in the house, and to see his daughter laughing, truly laughing, filled his chest with a warmth he hadn't realized he had been missing. As the dinner came to an end, Gabriel sat back in his chair, watching Sophia and Amara exchange a quiet joke between them. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt so at ease, so free of the heaviness that had pressed down on him for months. It wasn't just the laughter that filled the room, it was the palpable sense of connection. The three of them, in their quiet, unspoken way, had formed something that Gabriel hadn't known he needed, a family of sorts. It wasn't the family they had once been, with Isabel and the life they had built together, but it was a new one, born from the ashes of loss. It was fragile, yes, but it was there, a quiet testament to the power of time, patience, and music. That evening, after dinner, when Sophia had gone upstairs to her room, Gabriel stayed behind in the living room, his thoughts heavy with the realization of just how much had changed in such a short time. He found Amara in the corner, tidying up the remnants of their meal, and as he approached her, the weight of gratitude hit him all at once. She had done so much more than just care for his daughter. She had become a lifeline for Sophia, and in doing so, she had given Gabriel something he hadn't realized he needed: hope. "Amara," he said quietly, his voice carrying a tone he hadn't intended. She looked up, her expression soft and open, waiting for him to speak. I just wanted to thank you. For everything. You've done more for Sophia than I could have ever hoped for. I don't think you'll ever understand just how much it means to me." She smiled, a modest, humble smile that showed she wasn't seeking recognition. "It's just what I do, Gabriel. It's no trouble at all." But Gabriel could hear the depth of her sincerity in her voice, and he knew there was more to her words than just a casual reply. There was a quiet strength in her, a gentleness that had started to change everything in the Russo household. He wanted to say more, wanted to express just how much her presence had changed things, but he found himself speechless. The words seemed to get caught in his throat, tangled in the emotions he wasn't yet ready to face. And yet, as he stood there in the quiet of the room, he couldn't ignore the stirrings of something more. Something beyond gratitude. Something deeper. He had watched her grow close to Sophia, had watched as their bond deepened with each passing day. And now, with his daughter smiling again, with her joy beginning to return, Gabriel was forced to confront the reality that his feelings for Amara had shifted too. There was something about her, something about the way she cared for his daughter, the way she held space for both of them during their darkest moments, that made him realize just how much she had come to mean to him. But neither of them spoke of it. Neither of them acknowledged the subtle shift in their relationship. It wasn't time yet. They weren't ready to confront it. There were still so many unspoken things between them, so many uncertainties. And so, they continued in their quiet, comforting routine. Gabriel, now more trusting of Amara than ever, couldn't help but feel a growing admiration for her, one that went beyond her role as a caretaker. It was something more. But for now, he let it sit quietly in his chest, an unspoken truth that neither of them was ready to address. As the evening wore on, and the sounds of the house slowly quieted once more, Gabriel retreated to his study. He sat at his desk, the weight of the day pressing down on him, but this time, it wasn't the crushing weight of grief that had plagued him for so long. It was something different, something that felt almost like hope. If you were in Amara's position, would you have taken the step to comfort Sophia like she did? How would you have handled the emotional bond forming between you and the family? Leave a comment below. It had been a long day, the kind where time seemed to slip away unnoticed as Gabriel worked through one call after another, trying to keep his empire moving forward. But even amidst the swirl of business, he couldn't shake the quiet thoughts that had been lingering at the back of his mind all evening. He glanced over at the large clock in his study. It was nearly midnight. The house had long since settled into its usual quiet, but tonight, there was something different in the air. The walls, once filled with an oppressive silence, now hummed with a subtle sense of connection, something he hadn't felt in months. The evening had been a peaceful one, the first in a long time. Dinner had been lively. Sophia was in a better mood than she had been in weeks, her laughter filling the dining room, her eyes brighter, more alive. Amara had been there, sitting across from Gabriel, her quiet presence almost a balm for the raw edges of their lives. The simple act of sharing a meal together felt like a step forward, and Gabriel couldn't help but notice how much more natural it felt with Amara around. She wasn't just a maid or caretaker anymore. She had become an essential part of their lives. He stood up from his desk and paced around the room for a moment, his thoughts drifting toward Amara. Over the past few weeks, he had been trying to ignore something that had been growing inside him, something that had begun to feel impossible to deny. Every time he looked at her, something stirred, a quiet admiration, a deep respect, and to his surprise, something more. It was as if she had quietly stitched herself into the fabric of their lives, a presence that, though unobtrusive, had become irreplaceable. She had given his daughter the gift of healing, and in doing so, she had woven her way into his heart in ways he hadn't expected. He couldn't deny it any longer. He had been trying to convince himself that his feelings were simply gratitude, a deep thankfulness for the emotional support she had offered Sophia, for the way she had patiently helped the little girl find her way back from the depths of her grief. But now, as he stood there in the quiet of the study, the truth was clear. His feelings for Amara had grown beyond gratitude. There was something else, something deeper, something more vulnerable that had quietly blossomed inside him. Gabriel walked toward the living room, where Amara was sitting, as she often did, with her guitar resting beside her. She was fiddling with the strings, the soft, comforting sound filling the space between them. He stood at the doorway for a moment, watching her, as she hummed quietly to herself. Her presence in the room was like a steady anchor, and for the first time in a long time, Gabriel felt at peace in his own home. Without a word, he stepped inside and sat beside her. Amara looked up, her gaze warm and patient, waiting for him to speak. She had always been quiet, but there was a kindness in her eyes that had begun to comfort him in ways he couldn't fully explain. "Amara," Gabriel began, his voice low, almost tentative. "I've been thinking about something for a while now." His words hung in the air, delicate, as if testing the space between them. She nodded slightly, encouraging him to continue, though she seemed to sense the weight of the conversation that was about to unfold. "I don't know when it happened," he said quietly, looking down at his hands, unsure of how to put the feelings into words. "But I've started to see you differently. Not just as someone who helps out around the house, not just as Sophia's caretaker. You've become much more than that." He paused, feeling the vulnerability of the admission settle in his chest. "You've become part of our lives, Amara. And I can't imagine life here without you anymore." The room fell into a gentle silence, the sound of Amara's guitar the only thing filling the space between them. She was still watching him closely, but her eyes were softer now, filled with something Gabriel couldn't quite read. "Gabriel," she said after a beat, her voice steady but gentle, "I never meant to be anything more than what I am here for. To help. To support." Her words felt cautious, almost unsure. But her gaze never left his, and Gabriel could sense that there was more to it, more than just the role she had taken on in their lives. "I know," Gabriel replied, his voice warm but thick with emotion. "But over the weeks, I've come to realize that you're not just here for Sophia, or even for me. You've become part of this family. You've become someone I trust." He reached out, his hand brushing against hers. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was enough to convey everything he couldn't say with words. Amara looked down at their hands, and for a moment, Gabriel thought she might pull away. But instead she lingered, her fingers brushing lightly over his. It was a simple, quiet connection, but to Gabriel, it felt like the world had shifted again. "I feel it too," she admitted softly, her voice tinged with hesitation. "I didn't expect to," she stopped, taking a deep breath before continuing. "I didn't expect to get so close. To feel like I'm not just here for Sophia. I've come to care for you both. And it's been harder than I thought." Her words were raw, honest. "Because I don't know what that means, Gabriel. I don't know what it means to care for you in the way I do now." Gabriel's heart thudded in his chest, the weight of her admission sinking in. The quiet understanding between them had always been there, but now it was blossoming into something far more complicated, something neither of them had expected. "I understand," he said, his voice low and full of meaning. "I don't want you to feel pressured. He paused, looking into her eyes, searching for the right words. "I've been so focused on helping Sophia heal that I never realized I was also healing. And part of that healing is you. Your presence, your kindness. You've made me realize that I'm ready for something more than just survival, Amara. I'm ready to imagine a future with you in it." She held his gaze for a long moment, and for the first time, the emotional barrier between them began to crumble. There was still fear there, still hesitation. But there was something else too, something powerful, something that had begun to take root in their hearts. Amara reached out, her hand resting gently on his. "No matter what happens," she said softly, "Sophia will always come first. She's been through so much." Gabriel nodded, a small reassuring smile tugging at his lips. She will. She always will. But in that moment he knew. They were no longer just a man, a woman, and a child sharing a house. They were becoming something new. A family. A family born from loss, but built on trust, healing, and maybe even love. And for the first time in a long while, Gabriel felt the hope of a future. A future with Amara by his side. If you were in Amara's position, would you have taken the step to comfort Sophia like she did? How would you have handled the emotional bond forming between you and the family? Leave a comment below. The mornings had begun to feel different. It was subtle at first, but over time, the changes in the Russo household became undeniable. The mansion, once filled with an oppressive silence, now hummed with the sound of laughter, the light chatter of a small family finding its way. Gabriel, Amara, and Sophia had settled into a new rhythm, one that felt less like a collection of strangers and more like a real family. Sophia had blossomed. The little girl who had once been a shell of herself, haunted by grief, now smiled more often. She was more playful, more present. Her laughter filled the rooms, and Gabriel couldn't help but feel a swell of pride whenever he saw her engaging with Amara. The bond between them was undeniable. It was the quiet connection that had started with a single song and had grown into something deeper, something rooted in the kind of love that didn't need to be rushed or forced. Amara had become more than just a caretaker to Sophia. She had become a second mother, a steady, calming presence in Sophia's life. Gabriel had watched their relationship evolve from the first hesitant steps to something so beautifully natural. They no longer needed to hide behind the walls of grief. They had begun to heal, not just separately but together. For Gabriel, the change was just as profound. He had always loved his daughter, of course, but over the past few months, his feelings for Amara had shifted in ways he couldn't have predicted. At first, he had admired her, had been grateful for the way she helped Sophia find her way back from the depths of her grief. But now, as he watched her with his daughter, as he witnessed the quiet strength in her, he realized that there was something more. Something deeper. His admiration for her had blossomed into love, soft but undeniable. He had tried to ignore it, tried to keep his feelings buried beneath the weight of his responsibilities. But it was impossible to deny. Amara had become an irreplaceable part of their lives, not just for Sophia, but for him too. She had helped heal the pieces of him that he didn't even know were broken. And as he stood in the kitchen one evening, watching Amara prepare dinner with Sophia by her side, something inside him shifted. It was time. Time to take the next step, to let go of the fear that had kept him from moving forward. The moment came quietly, during one of their shared evening meals. The three of them were seated at the table, Gabriel, Amara, and Sophia, eating their food, talking about nothing and everything all at once. It was simple, this family of three, but there was something so beautiful in its simplicity. The kind of beauty that came from shared understanding, from quiet moments that didn't need to be filled with words. As they finished eating, Gabriel caught Amara's gaze across the table. She smiled at him softly, and something inside him surged, something deep and sure. He stood up from his chair, his heart pounding in his chest. Amara, sensing his movement, looked up at him, her eyes questioning but calm. "Amara," Gabriel said, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "There's something I've been meaning to say. I've been thinking about this for a while, and I know it's a big step. But I need you to know that you're not just here for Sophia and me. You've become so much more than that. You've become part of our lives, part of our family. And I don't want to imagine my life without you in it." Amara's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't look away. She met his eyes, her gaze soft and filled with understanding. "Gabriel," she whispered, the words more than just a response, they were a confession of her own. She had known it for a while now, the feelings that had grown between them, the quiet affection that had blossomed over time. "I feel the same way. I never expected any of this. But you and Sophia, you've made me feel like I'm home. Like I'm part of something I never thought I would have." Gabriel stepped closer, his hand reaching out to gently take hers. The warmth between them was undeniable. "Then let's make it official," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "Amara, will you marry me? Will you be a permanent part of this family? Sophia and we need you. And I need you." Amara's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. The weight of Gabriel's words settled over her like a warm embrace, and she couldn't help the tears that welled up in her eyes. She had never imagined this, never thought that the love and connection they had built would grow into something this beautiful, this real. "Yes," she whispered, her voice shaking with emotion. "Yes, Gabriel. I will. I will marry you." Gabriel smiled, his heart swelling with joy and relief. It was a simple answer, but it was the one that had been waiting to be said. The promise of a new beginning, of a life built on love, respect, and a shared commitment to healing and growing together. Sophia, who had been quietly listening from the other room, came running in at the sound of their laughter. She had watched the whole exchange from the doorway, her face lighting up with the biggest smile Gabriel had seen in months. She ran to Amara, wrapping her arms around her in a tight embrace. "You're going to be my mom now?" she asked, her voice full of hope and joy. Amara knelt down to meet her, smiling through her tears. "Yes, Sophia. I'm going to be your mom. And I'm so happy." The three of them stood together, united by the love they had built and the promise of the future they were beginning to create. In that moment, it was as though everything that had come before, the pain, the loss, the fear, was suddenly worth it. They were a family. A real family, built not from blood, but from love and mutual respect. And as they stood there together, Gabriel knew that this was only the beginning. The road ahead would not always be easy, but it would be theirs to walk together. And that, he realized, was all that mattered. They were no longer just two strangers brought together by circumstance. They were a family, bound by love, and they were ready for whatever the future held. If you were in Amara's position, would you have taken the step to comfort Sophia like she did? How would you have handled the emotional bond forming between you and the family? Leave a comment below. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.